Hello and welcome to this evening's deliberative panel and forum on economic mobility. How can the American dream be more achievable for everyone? My name is Graham Bullock, and I'm a professor of political science at Davidson College and the faculty director of the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative, or DCI for short. I will be serving as the moderator of our event and panel discussion tonight. The DCI is happy to be co-hosting tonight's event with Davidson College's Center for Civic Engagement and the North Mecklenburg Economic Mobility Collaborative, which is a group of nonprofit professionals, faith and community leaders, and engaged citizens working together to create a unified community where everyone can thrive. So before we get started, we'd like to ask that you complete the short survey that has been copied into the chat if you haven't done so already. We'll also be sharing a similar survey at the end of the event. These surveys are part of the research component of the DCI and will help us improve the design of our events in the future. We've also enabled live auto transcription for this event. If you'd like to enable this on your end, just click the More button and then select Show Subtitle. Please note that captions are automated, so they may not always be accurate. We also encourage you to switch to speaker view in Zoom, as we will be spotlighting the speakers and it will be easier to see who is talking in that view. Just go up to View in the upper right-hand corner of your screen and select Speaker View. So now that you can hopefully see me, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight for the DCI's first deliberative forum of 2022, following our events on free speech and inclusion, the future of housing, and reforming the Supreme Court last year. Before we begin, we'd like to share a little about the DCI, which you can learn more about on our website. Its purpose is to create opportunities for Davidson students, faculty, staff, alumni, and members of the wider community to productively engage with one another on difficult and important issues facing our community and society. Now, how to improve economic mobility is certainly one of those issues, as well-meaning and well-informed people can differ on what our goals should be, what the key obstacles are, and what solutions should be implemented to make the American dream more accessible for everyone. They may, for example, have different views on whether we should focus on our goals on mobility relative to where we start out in life, mobility relative to our parents, or mobility relative to our peers. In terms of solutions, some may focus more on creating employment opportunities, others on strengthening safety nets, and still others on directly reducing inequalities. To help us better understand and explore these diverse perspectives, we've paired a fantastic panel of experts with an opportunity for all of you to talk through these questions with one another in small groups. We have 20 DCI facilitators ready to facilitate these discussions and lead you through the deliberation guide that we shared with you previously and is available at this link in the chat. So as you know, tonight's event is free of charge. The only thing we ask is that you join the small group discussions after the panel. These discussions are the primary purpose of our deliberative forums. The panel is designed to catalyze your conversations with your fellow citizens. They are a great opportunity for you to both express your own ideas and questions while listening to those of others in your group. We've already created your discussion groups, and I can tell you they all include a wonderful range of people with perspectives and experiences and promise very engaging and rewarding conversations. But first, 3 of the DCI's fellows will introduce our esteemed panelists. First, Kelly McLaughlin.
Hi, my name is Kelly McLaughlin. I'm a current freshman here at Davidson. I'm undecided on my major, and I'm from Dublin, Ohio, but I'm super happy to welcome Sherry Chisholm as one of our speakers tonight. Sherry is the Executive Director of Leading on Opportunity, a local nonprofit organization created in 2017 that is dedicated to ensuring that within a generation, every child in Charlotte-Mecklenburg will have an equal chance to achieve social and economic success. Ms. Chisholm joined the organization in 2020 after serving as the founding executive director of Urban Alliance Detroit and founder and CEO of Free Space Consulting Group. Ms. Chisholm holds master's degrees in education from Harvard University and the Broad Center for the Management of School Systems. And she has held leadership roles with Teach for America, the School District of Palm Beach County, Florida, and the Fulton County School System in Metro Atlanta. Super happy to have her here.
Thanks, Kelly. And now Prithvi Rai.
Hello, everybody. My name is Prithvi. I'm a sophomore economics major. I live in Northern California and also in New Delhi in India. It's a pleasure to introduce Mr. Keith Cockrell today. He's the president of Bank of America Charlotte and also leads Bank of America's efforts to leverage its resources to address social and economic concerns, build strong communities, and support the health and safety of its employees. He has worked at Bank of America for 28 years, leadership positions related to consumer and small business services, global technology and operations, and customer service. Mr. Cockrell has also served as vice chair of the bank's Global Diversity and Inclusion Council and received 2 D&I awards within the company. He is a current member of Davidson College's Board of Visitors and has served on the boards of My Brother's Keeper, the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance, and the United Way. It's a pleasure to have you, Mr. Cockrell. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Prithvi. And now Kevin Chen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Chen. I'm a senior, a psychology major and public health minor at Davidson. I am from Boulder, Colorado. And today I have the honor of introducing Patrick Gary. Patrick Gary is a professor at the University of South Dakota School of Law and director of the Hageman Center for Legal and Public Policy Research. Professor Gary is the author of over 40 scholarly articles and 22 books and has published extensively on poverty, limited government, and conservatism. His books include The False Promise of Big Government, How Washington Helps the Rich and Hurts the Poor, and Conservatism Redefined, A Creed for the Poor and Disadvantaged. And his essays include Conservatism and the Real Problems of Income Inequality and Education as the Key to Opportunity and Upward Mobility. Dr. Gary has also served as a visiting scholar at Columbia University's School of Law and earned his JD and PhD from the University of Minnesota. It is a pleasure to have you here, Dr. Gary.
Thanks, Kevin. So we've asked each panelist to speak for a few minutes about what they see as the most important goals, needs, and solutions that we should be focusing on related to economic mobility, either nationally or in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg region, or both. After they share their remarks, then I'll moderate a conversation among the panelists to further explore some of the themes they've raised and some of the questions that you'll be talking about in your breakout rooms. So now I'll turn it over to Sherry to start us off. And I want to note if you can stay on mute while everyone's talking, that'd be great. Sherry, welcome.
Thank you so much, Graham. Thank you to Davidson for welcoming me to today's panel. I'm really thankful to have an opportunity to share a bit about my journey as well as what we're doing at Lead In on Opportunity. As I was preparing for today's discussion, I thought deeply about how could I make economic mobility relevant and personal in terms of how I would describe what it is and what I think is necessary. And so in the brief time that I have with you all today, I want to supplement what you all have read or studied, especially in advance for today's call, with my journey and how it speaks to how economic mobility is woven into all of our lives in ways that are less apparent when done well. So most of y'all have had access to, or at least heard about Charlotte being 50 out of 50, or the Mecklenburg area being 96 out of 100. And once that came out, the community in Charlotte really galvanized around what it would look like to move Charlotte forward. And so there was a task force you all have heard of before that eventually put together a report. And that report defined what needed to happen in Charlotte. So what were those recommendations in the Charlotte community that needed to be true in order for opportunity to be equitably available to all? And we coalesced around 5 concepts. Those 5 concepts are college and career readiness, child and family stability, early education, social capital, essentially who you know, and segregation. So segregation, of course, diminishes your ability to increase in economic mobility. And those concepts remain true now as what really grounds us in our work at Leading on Opportunity and how I'll talk about my story. So the language that we use around economic mobility can plainly be described in the most layman of terms as a practitioner in the nonprofit space. It's having what you need to get where you want to go, is how I would define the American dream. Gone are the days of the same dream for everyone in terms of a house and a picket fence and X number of children and a dog. But we really want to think about, do you have what you need to achieve what your greatest dream would be? And those things are pretty foundational for everyone. It's education, it's housing, it's a good job, it's transportation, mental health, and access to people who can support you. And so this is what it shows. This is how it's looked in my life, and hopefully you'll see some of that in your experience as well. So for as long as I can remember, I have been fascinated by people and culture. I am originally from just outside of Detroit, Michigan, which is somewhat diverse, but in a lot of ways a pretty homogenous environment. It's pretty Black and white. And for as long as I can think back, I've always been fascinated with learning different cultures, and that's what I wanted my career to be. I wanted to learn about what people were doing and help them do that. And in my world, the way that showed up was in nonprofit. And I also knew that as much as I wanted to do that, that I didn't believe that I had to be poor to do it. I thought that you could do well and also make a good income, but I had no idea of how to go about doing that. Luckily for me, my family started that journey for me without me even asking. Being a Black woman from Detroit means that I am most likely the granddaughter or descendant of Black folks who came to the North in the 40s and 50s to work in the auto industry because there was no economic opportunity available for them in the rural South. And that's very true for my family. My grandparents came to work in the auto industry. My grandfather did, and my grandmother was a teacher's aide. And the next generation, my mother became a teacher and principal, and I've spent most of my career in K-12 education, really working on those problems from a systemic level. So year after year, generation after generation, my family was putting in the stable support in order for me to be creative, to access the education I wanted that was not available to my family just 2 generations before, or actually just 1 generation before. My mother grew up in poverty, but every generation we were getting a little bit closer because we had a stable home and access to education, which was really the first step in putting us on the right track. Being able to be in the same home for the entirety of my upbringing enabled me to be in the same school system, have a strong support network around me in terms of church and people who poured into me, and ultimately led to me applying to the University of Michigan, which was my first step in access to increased opportunity. This story I'll land in. Once I got there, I knew, my mother had been a teacher and principal. My father and stepfather had both dropped out of high school, but had gone on to get their GEDs and worked in the auto industry. And so my understanding of what was available to me in terms of career was quite limited. Luckily for me, I made a friend named Mary Claire, who was just like me, a young female college student. However, she was white and she came from a wealthy background in Andover, Boston. And she was applying to be a consultant at Deloitte. I had never in my life heard of what consulting was. I hadn't heard of Deloitte. I didn't know it was a possibility for me. And she invited me to case study for her. And that was one critical moment where my social capital gave me access to more in a way that isn't incredibly academic, but is very real in terms of action. Through that, I applied to Deloitte. I accepted with Deloitte at 22, and at 22, I was making more money than my parents had made the entirety of their career. It set me on a path to access more that I never knew had been possible for me. And I'm very thankful to her in that experience, and thankful to Deloitte for building those critical and foundational business practices in me. Went on from there to explore the world, met lots of really interesting and exciting people, and wanted to know what I could do next. And so my next step was to get a graduate degree, which is what you're supposed to do. Luckily for me, while I was at Deloitte, I met a young man who was an immigrant from Haiti, who is now my very best friend in the world, who had gone to Harvard to graduate school. And he said, if I can do it, you can too. And so we spent one weekend in Miami, Florida, writing my graduate student admissions essays which eventually led to me being admitted to Harvard and completely changed what access would be available to me. These are two examples of where people from their slice of the world were able to help and support someone because they saw something in them, and that person was me. Each time increasing my economic mobility and giving me access to something I didn't know would be possible for me. Since graduating from Harvard, I've been able to continue working in business and primarily working in the education sector, helping large districts think through what's possible for them in terms of changing outcomes for people. Like I said, leaning into helping people from an area I didn't know was possible, while also creating a life that was beneficial to me, where I could pay off debt. I could live in a safe and affordable home. I could set up things for my now daughter who's in place. And for me, the moments along my life that have led to my economic mobility have not been super complicated, have not been through the study of particular articles, which are certainly beneficial, but from real world action of folks who are in my environment who give me access to either systems or people who've made that possible. And so now where I find myself at Leading on Opportunity is having the chance to do that for others, to help a city right some of the wrongs, to set up systems that enable connections like those I've had to Exeter or those I've had to Mary Claire, who have had access to experiences or access to knowledge that was not available to me in my community. And we want it to be true here in Charlotte. So Leading on Opportunity is now organized as a systems level organization that seeks to solve those complex problems, that thinks through how can Charlotte organize itself around ideas and concepts that make possibility true for those right here in Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Sherry. And now we'll go to Keith.
Well, Graham, thank you and good evening. It's a pleasure for me to be with you for this discussion tonight. Davidson is near and dear to me and my family. My oldest daughter is a graduate of Davidson and now pursuing her law degree at Howard University. I would share that we're all products of our experience. And perhaps I'll pick up where Sherry left off and just give you a thumbnail profile for me. My family were coal miners and worked in the coal mines. And so I and my siblings are first generation college educated. And Sierra, God willing, will be the first lawyer in our family on my side or on my wife's side. That's a significant accomplishment for our family when that occurs. We had our first PhD graduate in my family just 2 years ago. So within a generation, you could see the impact and the career opportunity and the mobility of young people who look like me. So there's a couple of things that immediately come to mind from my perspective. Although raised in poverty by uneducated parents and uneducated grandparents, I had the benefit of people who came into my life, much like Sherry, who introduced me to things that saw something in me that provided pathways or opportunities. When I made my decision to major in engineering, I could barely spell engineering probably, but I definitely didn't know an engineer. I did well in chemistry when I was in high school, so that's why I declared as my major, that I'd be a chemical engineer. And then I took freshman chem and I knew that wasn't going to be my life dream. But there's a few things that I hope that we'll have an opportunity to discuss further. I don't believe these are very complicated opportunities and issues regarding providing upward mobility for folks. But there's one thing that I feel very, very strongly about, that we can come together around some common interest. And for many of us who are parents or have a love for children, I believe that shouldn't every child have an opportunity to be the best that she can be or he can be, to be a productive member of our community? As working in corporate America as long as I have, I'm always in need of more talent, always in need. The markets continue to change, clients continue to change, It's extremely competitive and technology continues to change. So there's always skills. And so can't we come together? And these issues are complex. It's not either or, but the power of and. Can we try to figure out how we can provide educational opportunities while providing health care for folks, while providing stable housing and opportunities for families to have a working living wage to pay for their family? I believe that most people want to be on their own, do things on their own, don't want handouts. There's always going to be exceptions. However, I believe part of the solution can be in the spirit of collaboration. I know for us here at Bank of America, we know that we don't have the means to solve all of these problems, but we do believe that we can be a catalyst for change, positive change, and that collaborating across the board and establishing alliances, partnerships, both public and private, that we can come together to perhaps solve, I apologize, to perhaps solve some of these current issues about upward mobility for children. So I'd love to acknowledge that we believe in the power of educating young people and giving them a full opportunity to do their very best. And if we're willing to be proximate to these issues that we're facing today, that for me, my children will never experience the poverty that I was faced with. But it's clearly very important for me because now I'm exposed to rooms that I didn't even know existed, opportunities that I never knew existed. But the power of someone who takes an interest in you, and yes, I do believe that education can be a significant differentiator in the trajectory of a young person's life. Clearly it was in mine. So I'm going to ask us all to continue to have thoughts around not just providing services, not just trying to close gaps that exist. I'm not even interested in having the debate of how we got here. Let's just acknowledge that every child deserves an opportunity to excel, not just attend school, but to excel. And if we're committed to listening, working together, then I think we can find the power of and. Thank you for allowing me to join you. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Keith. Very much appreciate your perspective. And now we'll go to Patrick.
Thank you. I'm coming to you all from a place much different from where you are. I'm on the White Earth Reservation in northern Minnesota, where there's about 3 feet of snow on the ground, and it's 10 degrees below zero. So we're beginning in a little bit of an unequal circumstance here. But I want to start off with the story that happened today. I was walking into a building across the street from the Reservation High School with an older man. He was severely handicapped and struggling and quite a bit overweight, and he fell on the ice. And immediately there were 3 students from across the street came and helped us, along with several people who stopped as they were driving by. And it's not a dramatic story and it's not a complicated story, but out of that, every now and then we have situations that really show us the sort of the deep, true concern that people have for their fellow human beings. And that's what really this, I think, is about too. What we're talking about today is that sometimes we look at it as economic issues and political issues, but it's really a concern for each other, for the society we live in. And I think as Keith really put it very well about our neighbor and the kind of lives that we wish for our neighbor. I don't think of income inequality and economic mobility as political issues. As Graham mentioned, I identify as a political conservative. I don't see these as issues. maybe the strategies for them are political, but not the issues themselves. None of us want income inequality. None of us want a suffocation of economic mobility. I think conservatives are oftentimes cast that way, but in fact, not only is economic mobility essential for individual freedom and dignity, but it really, if you don't have economic mobility, it's deeply threatening to the view of society, is certainly a view that conservatives have. In speaking about this issue, I might get just a bit more detailed in terms of the sort of the policy end of things, but the first thing I would do is separate out safety net, and we do talk about safety net with, say, like economic mobility. The reason I separate out safety net is because, again, I don't see that as a political issue. I don't see that as an issue where we have serious debates on. Again, we're going to have debates on strategy, but not on the existence of a safety net. A safety net is vital for a just society. It's vital for a stable society. People find themselves in times of trouble, and just like it's called a safety net. Just like if you go to the circus, no trapeze artist, no matter how good they are, gets up and performs without a safety net, because something might happen. And if that happens, you want the safety net to catch you. But of course, the key is that it catches you, but you don't want to end up there. But it addresses a serious problem and at least prevents it from becoming much worse and gives you a second chance. That's what I think of safety net is about, is giving a second chance. And I do think there that in talking about policy, government has a real role there, because I don't see, practically speaking, how we can achieve a safety net any other way. But I also see a safety net then as something, again, that catches the individual, and then provides or gives that individual a second chance. And so that's what I want to talk about then, is that second chance. And I think that's what economic mobility and opportunity is all about. Once you've been caught and given that second chance, how do you go about doing that? And I focus oftentimes then on increasing economic mobility, more so than I focus on government efforts to decrease inequality. I oftentimes think that those efforts tend to trap us and to dictate, more than to allowing the kind of free American dream that Sherry talked about. I think that's very important, to think of the American dream isn't something that's static, that we're all striving to get at the same time. What we want is, we want what we want, and we're the ones who determine it. And we need the ability to pursue that which we turn. I think another reason, I won't go into the reasons for why I don't favor necessarily the next stage after the safety net to be government programs to decrease inequality. In a way, I might just give this one fact. I'm in the county, in the state, which has the highest per capita government spending, and yet it's the poorest county in the state as well. So I tend to look on how to address this problem as one of increasing equality of opportunity rather than some kind of equality of result. I look on the American dream as something that's upward looking, seeking to empower people to achieve the kind of dream that they want to achieve. And so therefore, I tend to look then at this area more at the private sector than the public sector. I look on the public sector to provide a safety net. I look at the private sector to provide this this kind of vault out of that safety net. And in respect, then I try to identify the causes of some of the primary causes of what hinders people from being able to achieve economic mobility and the safety net. I don't tend to look on economic inequality as well as poverty as necessarily a simple function of money. How much money do you have? Brookings did a famous study years ago in which it found that if a person avoids substance abuse, stays out of jail, graduates from high school, and holds any job for a year, that they have almost no chance of falling into poverty. And of course, all those factors really relate to, the behavioral environment of individuals, and that's a very complex issue, is to address that. Education, as Keith mentioned, vitally important, and the key is to provide the same educational opportunities to everyone, that they have that initial opportunity. And finally, I think the greatest determinator of economic mobility is work. And sometimes I think we ignore that as far as what can we do to provide the kind of work opportunities to people so that they can take those opportunities and translate it into economic mobility. And so I'll conclude there, and thank you very much. And thank you to Graham and to Davidson for giving me this opportunity to appear with you all and talk to you.
Great, thank you, Patrick, for those thoughts, and thank all of our panelists. And now we're going to move into sort of a panel discussion. And my goal, we got about 20 minutes before we move into our breakout rooms. My goal is to kind of stimulate a conversation with some questions related to our topic. And the first is sort of related to goals, right? So I mean, Sherry and Keith, you both shared your own personal stories that I think most people would say are kind of quintessential examples of the American dream. And Patrick, you shared a different story from where you are now, where people came together and helped someone, right? That's also a version of the American dream. And so beyond those anecdotes, which are, deeply meaningful, can we talk about broader goals? Like what are we aiming for? Are we aiming for, like I said initially, sort of everyone to do better than their parents, which it used to be 90% of people did better than their parents back in 1940. More recently, it's less than 50%. Or is it something related to our peers, right? The inequalities within a generation? Or is it just, kind of more in a sense of absolute, from where you started when you're young, independent of your parents or your peers, that you're achieving your American dream? I'm curious, and as we talk, I hope we can both identify areas of agreement, but also maybe disagreement, because that's the spirit of the DCI and deliberation. So who wants to jump in? Keith?
Well, I could start, Graham. I like many of the things that Patrick framed up for us in terms of, this concept of, what is the dream? And again, the common denominator for me really are children and having the opportunity. And can we come together, again, beyond the politics of empowerment? And I do like the concept of, yes, I do believe that personally, that the federal government and central government does play a substantial role, not only in the past, but also in the present. Where we agree is, shouldn't a strong central government provide safety net? Because life happens. I was diagnosed a year ago and had cancer treatment a year ago. I'm fortunate to work for a great company that has, tremendous healthcare and benefits. And so I could do my research and make a decision, what is the best care for me, and educate myself, and now have a very, very positive outlook. And I had that positive outlook because, again, I worked in corporate America that provided me with an opportunity to have annual physicals and checkups, really encourage that. And it's almost it's almost like not the right thing to do if you don't go see a doctor. But I have many folks who don't have the benefit of working for a company like Bank of America that encourages that. And then they have different health outcomes because they weren't able to detect it early. So beyond just safety net, I believe that we can have a discussion regarding that. There are those that through no circumstance of their own, they're surrounded by drugs. They're surrounded by obstacles to get to school. And those obstacles could be something as simple as nourishment. It's hard to, stay focused and learn if you don't have stable housing and food. It's no fault of their own that they were born in that zip code. There's absolutely no question in my mind that I believe in the power of work. And so the opportunities, I believe, for us in this discussion and beyond is to acknowledge the commonalities, the things that we mutually agree on. And let's see if we can continue to move the needle. And if we can agree that we want to empower people and that the dream is not necessarily that my children are wealthier than me, but I surely hope that my children are happier and that they're well, even more than my wife and I. Whatever course of life they choose, because the size of the home, the car they drive, those things used to be so meaningful to us because we didn't have them. And so you equated, or you wanted that for your children because we didn't own our own home. I didn't live in my own home until relatively late in my childhood. My parents didn't have, formal credit because they didn't know.
So Keith, so that's great. So I hear a lot of different things there. Like one is that maybe, safety net is important, but maybe not enough, in terms of our goals as we think about economic mobility. Patrick or Sherry, would you like to jump in just as we think about goals?
It's somewhat building on what Keith said. I just think we need to redefine the goal. Like there is no destination. It's a journey. As Keith said, it's like, so we will be successful if everyone can own a certain type of house, have a certain type of car. Like, I just don't think that's what it is anymore. And I sometimes am troubled by folks wanting to know, are we there yet? I'm not sure if we ever arrive there. It's a commitment to small changes along the way. And some of what Keith mentioned or Patrick mentioned as well, it's about self-actualization. Do I have the opportunity to create the life that I want? And that may be a house that was bigger than my parents. It may be no house at all, and I get to travel the world and blog. That's like that, you get to decide. And I think the thing that I often come back to with economic mobility is our goal is to provide an environment where you have that choice, where you have the confidence to take risks, to do things that you're passionate about, as opposed to it being one single way. So I don't think the question is absolute economic mobility or relative economic mobility. It's about individual choice and providing the opportunity for that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sherry. Patrick?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with both Sherry and Keith about, it's very difficult to measure. And I know that certainly if we're shaping federal policy and state policy, we got to have parameters and we've got to have metrics and we have to have data, to tell us where we're going and whether we're succeeding or not. But when we do talk about the American dream, I mean, we all know people, right, who've decided to live lives other than their parents, and they don't have the same type of economic resources. But like Keith said, the question is are they happy? Are they doing what they want to do? And I guess from that instance, then I changed the focus on American dream from economic statistics to maybe those kinds of parameters that might indicate whether people have that freedom and happiness. Looking at our educational system, do we feel that our educational system is giving an equal shot and an adequate shot to everyone? because we know that that requires it. We know that you're not going to be able to have freedom of opportunity if you don't have an adequate educational system. What about, as Keith mentioned, addiction? What about people's family and neighborhood lives? You know, to look at that, are family and neighborhood lives more stable and more peaceful than they were a generation ago? And if they're not more stable and more peaceful, then you can't expect people to live healthy lives with the freedom to choose where they go to if they're just struggling day after day to survive. So I guess rather than looking at the parameter, I'd maybe look at what I might call those sub-parameters. What about family life? What about neighborhood community life? What about education?
Great. Yeah. So big picture, it's a journey, not a destination, multiple parameters, you know, maybe thinking outside the box of relative versus absolute mobility. Patrick, I'm going to go back to you on the next question, and because you started to talk about it, but then Sherry and Keith as well. Like, what we're, you know, take our goal is sort of given. Like, what do you see as the sort of most important obstacles, you know, to improving economic mobility? Like, if you could pick one or two things to really focus on, you know, what do you think those should be?
I think the most important thing is you know, one's experience in one's youth, in their family and neighborhood environment, and whether they're coming out of that with a healthy life outlook, with a healthy life situation. That precedes everything, it seems to me, that you know, before we talk about education, before we talk about jobs, before we talk about income from those jobs, I mean, that all precedes one after another, but it's the most difficult one to discuss because it's pretty hard to come up with policies, you know, unless again we rely on that kind of network of non-governmental organizations we have. But that's what I would say is the most important factor to begin with.
Great. So Sherry or Keith, would you like to jump in with what you think might be the most important? Is it also education and you know, childhood experiences, or is it something else?
I do believe that childhood experiences and our surrounding environment can be a huge barrier or obstacle for opportunity and economic movement. There's no question in my mind about that. However, I do believe that policy can play a very important role here, because from my perspective, policy did help get us in this position. You know, there's a reason why some of these neighborhoods look like they do, are so segregated, why those schools are so poor performing. We know how we fund public education here, through a tax base. And if you don't have the taxes, those schools here in Charlotte, we still see the disparity between our public school systems. Where are the new schools going? They're not going into these well-established, historically, you know, Black neighborhoods. Let's just be candid about that. And so I think there are policy help get us into this position. If we believe that education can be a part of the solution, then I think policy can change to encourage those that are impoverished to believe that they really can go to college. They don't have to go to a four-year school like Davidson necessarily, but even in corporate America, we can change policy to say that, do we really require a four-year BS or BA degree for an entry-level position? And you're seeing that start to shift now. We've eliminated that requirement at Bank of America for many, many years. We're learning more about neurodiversity, as an example. Candidates that are on the spectrum, but you know, they got gifts, they got skills. And in this hyper hot environment trying to find talent in cybersecurity, they're in high demand. And the higher educational institutions can't satisfy that demand. So we're doing things to try to find skills and hire based on skills and grow skills versus necessarily degrees.
Mhm.
And so it's some of these things that it's not all governmental policies, but also in private practice policies that I believe must change.
Okay. Thanks, Keith. Sherry?
I don't believe the solution lies in one particular area or with one specific body. For me, I feel my experience has led me to believe that we've addressed these issues in silos. We want to fix, like, education will not fix everything. Policy will not fix everything. There needs to be change everywhere, in the business community, in the folks who are doing the safety network. It was by design, as Keith said, through generations of work and practices and policies that we got to this place. And so thinking that one thing will change everything is just not, I don't think it's a possibility. And then in addition to that, I do believe that we have to look at this work through a race-based lens. We would be remiss if we didn't consider issues of segregation and how it plays into outcomes in our country.
But if I can add, poverty knows no color. Yes, my family were Black coal miners, but we still have coal miners, or those who are descendant of coal miners like me, who their skin tone isn't mine, and they're still suffering through. My grandfather had Black lung, so I grew up cherishing the union that he was part of. Why? Because it provided health care. Because he needed to lose a lung, and we were paycheck to paycheck. So for me, although I've never worked for a union company or a company that has had a union, I know what it did for my family. Because without the assistance in healthcare, I don't know where we would have been.
Great. So that's great. I think a fantastic segue to sort of the last few minutes to talk about policies, to talk about solutions, that you all sort of prioritize, like what, if leaving here today, that you would want us all to sort of say, this is what we need to do, right? Recognizing that, there's 100 things we need to do, but what would be the sort of the priority for you to tackle those obstacles, to get to those goals related to economic mobility and the American dream, as we've been talking about. So maybe this time I'll go to Sherry first.
Yeah, I don't think it's one policy. Again, if you reflect on my story or the story that Keith told or Patrick told, it's been a collection of small but impactful changes. And so oftentimes we have these conversations, understandably from an academic perspective, but the work happens in reality. So I encourage folks on this call, students in particular, to think about your journey, how you got here, and then how you can lift someone else up. And it doesn't, it could be a protest, it could be advocating for policy, it could be introducing a friend to a part of the university they've never known of before, and that makes significant change for that individual. So I think my call would be to not necessarily look outside of yourself, but look at what you can do from your role to help someone else.
I like to pick up on that and bring it close to home here in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg county and in the surrounding areas here. I'm going to encourage us to get proximate. If we can all agree that a child deserves a chance, then let's acknowledge that this pandemic has had a tremendous impact on primary education. The gaps already existed for Blacks and Hispanics in our community in terms of their achievement gap in education. Again, as we've shared before, I'm not suggesting that education is the only path, but let's at least acknowledge that it's a path. And if we agree that it's a path, then for all of us who are working in higher education or have had the benefit of higher education, can't we find some time to give something back to a child, to tutor a child, to encourage them to be excellent in school? That no, enough of this A-B honor roll. You have the ability to be an A student. We can be proud of that B if you can tell us and look at yourself and say I'm proud of that B because I did my best work. But today, I think we have an opportunity, regardless of the progress that my wife and I have been able to achieve in our social standing, if you will. it's critically important that I get on a campus, whether that's a high school campus or a college campus, and give students hope that they may have not met someone like me, whose journey is the same or similar, but I can share my story. I can motivate them, and perhaps I can touch them in such a way that I restore hope or motivation to stick to it, to dream more. And we all have the power. Can we impact one life?
Thanks, Keith. Sherry, just a note, Sherry, thanks for challenging the question. It's something that we always teach our students to do, sort of. But Patrick, your thoughts on key policies, one or several, or just general solutions?
Well, like I said, it's hard to identify specific policies. I mean, one policy that I'm very much in favor of is and in the educational realm, to give education for choice to every single person. I see that as a policy that you can achieve a equality of education. But of course, like both Sherry and Keith have talked about, it also doesn't do any good to give someone the chance to go to the school of their choice if they're not also able to take advantage of that opportunity. So I kind of keep going back to it, and I keep thinking about strengthening families, strengthening neighborhoods. I was really impressed with what Keith said about all of these different networks where we can have to help people. And I think back to Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, which is decades old now, but I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to revive our civic community and our network of neighborhoods in the world that we have. I don't really know. I wish I had 3 policies to give you about how to help it, because if a single mother who's working and he needs help, they really need help. Maybe they need help from the gentleman a block down. He's got some extra time, need help to raise her son, to look after your son, to give guidance. How do you kind of revive that sort of spirit? How do you revive all of these institutions that once provided so much guidance and help to families, and how do you, in fact, I think, kind of support this push to standards as well? Hey, we expect a lot out of you. We expect, and we're going to help you, but we expect a lot out of you, and we're going to judge you, accordingly. So those are ideas, Graham. I'm letting you down because I'm not giving you specific policies, but oftentimes we talk so much about the notion of globalism and policies relating to globalism, but I see so many of our real challenges being very local, and being of the type that Keith talked about, of what's the network right there, and how can you use that network to empower people to take advantage of all the opportunities that are going to come at the next step.
And Graham, if I can just offer up, it's an example that we're very, very excited about here in Charlotte. This coalition that the mayor really initiated to raise $250 million, to dream a big dream, to say, hey, collectively, in a public-private way, can we address these corridors, what she calls corridors of opportunity? They're some of our most troubled neighborhoods in the city of Charlotte, where we come together. We may compete as financial services entities each and every day, but to solve some of these issues, we're actually coming together to provide 1% loans, to try to stimulate wealth creation, to support Black-owned, Hispanic-owned, women-owned businesses in these neighborhoods, not only because we know that small business fuels a neighborhood, fuels an economy, because they can provide jobs and employment opportunities, but those owners can create wealth in and of themselves, and they can stabilize a neighborhood. And so this public-private partnership that we've established here, to say you can take a look at this Renaissance West test that we're trying to do, to take over a community, provide all the wraparound services, fence it in, provide healthcare, provide schools, provide the counseling that's needed there, provide security, early childhood development, and see if we can provide those things in a collective way. It's not just big government coming in and writing a big check. It's a partnership with businesses who are coming in and say, hey, we want something different. And so, again, I don't think these are obviously not simple solutions, but I do believe that we can approach this from a collaborative. And so we can get beyond the debate of, big government or, am I funding, inequality of the past, or am I investing in the future? I'm trying to be a strong advocate for, let's invest in the future. Let's try to see if we can come together and deliver different outcomes. And the final point that I would make is that it is important. In my line of work, in private business, what we measure is what we generally do. And so back to that early discussion regarding setting goals and trying to identify what are we really trying to accomplish, and then measuring, coming up with scorecards that collectively we can agree to, I think we can change outcomes.
Thanks, Keith, and thanks, Patrick, and thanks, Sherry. I mean, those are all fantastic ideas and questions, to stimulate our participants who are here with us. And I think, Keith, you just gave a story of, sort of positive change and hope. Patrick, you said, look, we don't have all the answers, and I don't have all the answers, but let's think creatively. And Sherry, you challenged the question, we need to think comprehensively. We need to think, about it being a journey and not a destination. And so I think all of that, stimulate is a great catalyst, for the rest of us to, and in our breakout rooms, to answer these questions, to explore them at least together. What are our goals? What are the obstacles? And what do we need to achieve those goals? And so thank you all. And now everyone's going to have a chance to share your own insights and listen to one another's perspectives on these complex and challenging issues. And in a moment, we're going to send you to breakout rooms. We really hope that you stick around. We've got our facilitators here. They've dedicated their evening to be here with us. They include Davidson students, faculty, staff, alums, and community members. And they've completed an intensive training program hosted by the DCI. They'll guide you through a deliberative process that we hope will enable you to really learn from and engage with one another. They'll follow that deliberation guide that we sent to you in our reminders about the event. And the link is going to be put in the chat right now in case you don't have it. And just one note to highlight from the guide related to our expected outcomes from tonight. We do not expect you to come to any formal agreement or declarations about economic mobility, given the complexity of this topic. Instead, our focus is on deepening our knowledge of different perspectives on this complex issue. We recognize there's a lot of great work being done in making that American dream more accessible to everyone. And our hope is that this event and these conversations will complement those efforts. And also, as you're talking to each other, please remember that all of us are here tonight as individuals with a wide range of ties and identities. So while we may work for particular organizations or come from a particular community, we may not necessarily be here in a capacity to represent those organizations or communities. So instead, we find it most useful to think of ourselves here as individuals in all of our complexity, to learn and share our personal perspectives and lived experiences with one another. So to that end, we encourage you to lean in to the humane instincts and deliberative dispositions that make such learning and sharing possible and productive. Humility, open-mindedness, curiosity, kindness, and grace. Before you begin your discussion, your facilitators will walk you through some conversation agreements that will help reinforce these values. And our panelists will may be available to drop in to answer any key questions relevant to their particular expertise that come up during your conversation. Your facilitator just sent a quick note to our amazing DCI coordinator, Carla Cole, and the relevant panelists will come in and address your question. But they won't stay long because we want this part of the event to be about you all engaging with one another on this important topic. And I may drop in to see how things are going, but please just ignore me and continue your conversation. So, 2 last tips. If you're able and willing, we encourage you now to turn on your video so that your group can see you. It makes the Zoom group experience a a bit more like an in-person conversation and enables you all to see who you're talking to. And also please add your name to your Zoom screen if it is not already there. Just right click on your own, icon, your own face and select rename and write your name in. And so with that, we're going to open up the breakout rooms. So just click join and enjoy your conversations.